So Valve are working on a Dota 2 card game, and not everybody loves the idea of that. But having played it myself a couple of weeks ago, I think Artifact is actually looking really promising. Although at first glance it may appear quite overwhelming to a new player with its 3 separate boards and 3 separate mana pools, heroes, creeps, towers, the shot between rounds, when you sit down with it, I don't think Artifact is an especially confusing game to play. No, similar to Dota 2, it's just a game with a lot of depth to uncover. More depth, I'd argue, than its biggest competitor, Hearthstone.
Hearthstone, Heroes of Warcraft.
Hearthstone has been the king of video game card games for at least 4 years now, so what makes Artifact worth paying attention to? What makes it different to what Blizzard are doing? Let's do us a list. Number 1, Richard Garfield. He's the lead designer of Artifact, and depending on what you think about his previous work, you might find that extremely exciting. He's been designing card games since 1993, which is when he launched one that you may have heard of already, about colourful wizards. It's called Magic the Gathering. He's also the brain behind Netrunner, the Battletech CCG, Vampire the Eternal Struggle, the Star Wars trading card game, and the Great Dalmuti. I met him briefly while we were visiting Valve, and yeah, asked him how long he'd been thinking about the design for Artifact itself. Here's what he had to say.
Well, my games tend to run into one another, and separating failed designs from stepping stones towards a game, a finished game, is hard to do. But I first began thinking of electronic trading card games basically as soon as Magic came out, and we realized how inadequate it was for electronic play. And so since then, I've been working constantly, off and on different designs that would try to bring what was so exciting about trading card games into the electronic world.
Number 2, card trading. This is interesting, isn't it? Unlike Hearthstone, Artifact will actually allow you to trade digital cards with other players through Steam. This means that the cards should maintain a value, and that value can be used whenever you want to change the deck you're currently playing with. That has the potential to be an incredibly useful tool for this game's community. You're no longer relying solely on opening packs and to some extent luck to acquire the cards you want. This will be really interesting to see in practice, and there are some side effects to consider too. Like, for example, if a card in your collection gets nerfed and is suddenly less popular than it was the day before, your deck is maybe going to be worth less as a result. Will that mean players react to balance changes differently, more aggressively perhaps? I think it might. I don't actually know what to expect. I guess we look at Magic the Gathering as the closest example of this formula, but this is in a digital card space. How's that going to work? Number 3, on the flip side of card trading being allowed, I suppose, Artifact isn't going to be a free-to-play game. It'll cost money to purchase. How much? We don't know yet. What we do know is when you buy the game, you'll receive a set of starter cards. Presumably, there'll be at least enough to complete one deck, although you'd hope it'd be more than that. And each deck needs to contain 40 cards, 5 of which are heroes. And while we're speaking of card numbers, in total at launch, we're expecting more than 280 cards to be in the base game, with 44 different heroes. Although if I'm honest, I only really care about your boy Bristleback. The rest are just filler.
I'll hit him, and you just stand there looking small and weak.
Number 4, let's talk about those 3 different boards. From a gameplay point of view, that's one of the biggest differences between Artifact and Hearthstone. So to win a game of Artifact, you either need to defeat 2 of your opponent's towers on 2 separate boards, or lanes as they're referred to, or instead you can defeat 1 tower on a lane which has 30 HP, which then reveals the Ancient with a further 80 HP. Defeat that too, and you'll also win the game. That leads to loads of interesting decisions that you'll need to make while playing. Which lane or lanes are you going to focus on in terms of dealing damage, and which are you not? Because yes, you have 3 separate mana pools for each lane, but you only have 1 hand of cards to distribute amongst all 3, and some cards can actually use the mana of one lane to help out another. You're very unlikely to be entirely in control of all 3 lanes at once because of this, so it's about deciding which battles to lose and when you want to lose them. Number 5, heroes. Unlike in Hearthstone where you essentially play as the hero and it's that hero's HP that you need to defend or you lose the game, in Artifact things work differently. As we said earlier, you'll always have 5 heroes in your deck and you'll start the game with 3 of them already on the board, 1 in each lane. As the rounds go on, you'll be able to add the other two heroes into play, and you choose which lanes they jump into when you do that. But also, if one of your heroes dies, they're not gone forever. They'll usually be out of action for an entire round, but you're able to put them back into play once they've respawned, which means just like in Dota 2, you can have your heroes switching between lanes as you make an offensive push or need to defend against your opponents. Aside from that, hero cards are some of the more powerful cards in terms of pure stats, but they're also really important for another reason. You'll have noticed they all have a different colour. In the deck I'm playing here, I have access to blue and green hero cards, while my opponent is using black and red. Now look at my hand and you'll see that I've got some lovely blue cards that I can only play on a lane that currently has a blue hero in action. Same goes for the green cards, they can only be played on a lane with a green hero. So that means knocking out an enemy hero can quite simply prevent them from using cards until that hero gets replaced. It's not just about stopping their potential damage, it's about interrupting what that other player wants to do next turn. Number 6, killing another player's hero also nets you some gold, you've probably noticed. 5 gold to be exact, and you also get an additional gold coin per minion that you slay. That's nice. What's the gold for? Well, in between rounds you'll have access to the shopkeeper. Unfortunately in this gameplay, I don't have much gold to spend as I don't land many kills until later on in the game, but if I had, I could have spent that gold on extra cards like items, weapons, and armor. Which means, again, just like in Dota 2, if your heroes are dying a lot, you're feeding the other player. They'll be racking up a bunch of gold, which they'll likely be spending on powerful items to give to their heroes, which are in turn making them more difficult for you to kill, which is probably going to make them even more powerful. And yes, weapons, items, and accessories are persistent. Even if you finally kill that kitted out hero, they'll be coming back at some point with all that cool stuff, which you'll still need to deal with. Number 7, you can't choose who to attack. Unlike in Hearthstone, where typically you can select one of your cards and decide whether you want to attack the enemy player's hero or one of the cards that they have on the board, in Artifact, cards typically attack whichever card is directly opposite them. If there aren't any cards directly opposite, the game then decides each round whether they'll attack directly ahead or to the left and right. If there are no cards for them to attack, they'll hit the enemy player's tower instead. And that might sound a bit complicated, but at a basic level, it means that you can block powerful enemy cards with cards that you're willing to sacrifice to protect your tower. So, if a minion with its 4 health is soaking up an attack that's worth 10 damage, then that's probably a really smart play. Now there are plenty of cards to counter that, like one that switches the positioning of 2 units, but one of my favourite moments when I was playing was using a taunt card on an enemy hero to make sure that all of my cards attacked them and got the kill. As we said at the beginning, this game has a huge amount of depth. Number 8, and finally, let's end this with another really big one. Unlike in Hearthstone, where players take it in turns to take all of their actions, in Artifact, players take it in turns to play one card at a time. Once you run out of mana or cards to play on a particular lane, or perhaps you just don't want to play any more cards, the other player then can play whatever they have left. But up until that point, you're alternating. This means players have the opportunity to respond to every single action that the other player takes, which creates a very different kind of game in the end. It's less about building a deck that can execute a carefully laid plan and more of a turn-by-turn battle with the other player's decisions. Really, that's the one thing to know about Artifact when compared to Hearthstone, I reckon. They're both fantasy card games based on existing video game worlds, but in reality, I think they're very, very different games that will appeal to very different types of players. Hearthstone is about building a deck that has a set of clear strengths and weaknesses, and is meant to be played in a certain way unless luck, either good or bad, gets in the way. From what I've seen, Artifact looks more difficult to predict. It's a game with a lot more variables, and choosing between these two games isn't really about deciding which one of them is better, it's about deciding which of those two playstyles you prefer. There's quite a bit more detail we could go into here, but I think when it comes to the big differences between these two games, that's a good place to end it. If you have any questions about Artifact or my experience with the game, do let me know in the comments below and I will do my best to answer them. If not, there are 2 other videos we've uploaded so far about this game. One is a big chunk of gameplay, the other is an interview with Richard Garfield himself about Artifact's design. You might like to check that out if you are interested in that detail. And yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.